Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Yoav. I'm the General Manager for Atera here in the US, and it's my absolute pleasure to be joined today by Dr. Sarah Bird. Sarah, thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, and I've worked in AI basically my whole career. I went to school for that. I did a PhD at Berkeley at the intersection of machine learning, that's what we called it then, and systems, trying to figure out how do we really scale AI, how do we make it work in practice. And as part of that journey, I started as a researcher, and there was some really exciting technology at that time, things like reinforcement learning. And I was very keen to see how could this actually work in practice. So I started working with customers to figure that out. And as part of that, people had very interesting ideas about how we should use AI. So, for example, people said, oh, could we use this to automatically interview people? Or could we use this to, make other types of decisions? And that was actually really what drove me to make the transition into responsible AI, because I was so excited about the potential of AI and the AI future, but I realized if we didn't get it right and we didn't figure out how to make sure it worked responsibly and ensure that people used it responsibly, then we weren't really going to get the benefit of AI. And so I sort of adjusted my career to focus on this intersection of people and society and AI technology, and I've been here basically ever since.
That's super interesting. So Sarah, when people talk about responsible AI, I think one of the things that comes to mind is this a philosophy? Is this a technology? What does it actually mean? How do you think about what responsible AI is?
Yeah, everybody asks me this, and I wish I had a nice one-sentence answer. I think in general, it's a field, right? There are many different dimensions of it, but the core idea is that we need the technology to work the way we want it to work, in a way that we can trust, and ensure also that it's not misused. And so if we take, for example, the exciting world of generative AI, where we're spending a lot of time, that can range from looking at issues of fairness and bias to new types of cybersecurity attacks that the technology makes available, to errors that it makes, like hallucination. And so it really brings together a lot of different dimensions, but at the core, it's about making sure that the technology really works and works in a way that we can trust it.
Interesting. Obviously, a lot of these things involve trade-offs, right? They involve decisions between maybe efficiency on the one hand, practicality, kind of a lot of different trade-offs. When you think about things like privacy, transparency, effectiveness, what are some of the considerations that you take into account when you're making these types of decisions?
Yeah, I love this question because trade-offs is exactly where we spend all of our time. One of the classic ones we see right now in safety, digital safety, or AI safety is the tension between privacy and safety. Right? We can ensure much more effectively that technology is not misused, that we understand how it's being used if we're able to monitor and view things. But on the other hand, that could be a challenge in terms of privacy. Now, technology can help us actually bridge some of these gaps. The latest AI technology actually enables us to do a lot more monitoring eyes off, so that we're not actually looking at the data, but we're still able to check for different types of safety concerns. And so we do look at where we can actually sort of reduce the trade-offs that we have to make through innovation. But inherently, there's always going to be trade-offs between these different dimensions. Fairness and privacy is another classic one, where if we want to test the fairness of our systems, it works the best if you can understand the demographic factors. However, understanding someone's demographic factors might be a concern in terms of privacy. We usually don't have that information in our systems for privacy reasons, and so that's another place where we see tensions. And so a lot of the art and practice of responsible AI is figuring out not a one-size-fits-all answer, like we always prioritize privacy or always prioritize safety, but in a particular situation, for a particular technology, for a particular context, what is the right way to make that trade-off? And so that's actually where I spend a lot of my time, is really figuring out how to make these trade-offs in a contextual way.
And is that something that you see that there's changes based on geography? Is there kind of, are those decisions different based on what the product is? Are those decisions different based on where the geography is? Have you seen in your experience of those trade-offs vary greatly between product, between geographies, or is it typically a certain threshold that you don't want to cross, for example, when it comes to privacy?
Yes to all of them, basically, right? If something that might be appropriate, for example, in the context of news, like summarizing harmful content, because you're summarizing, for example, a violent event that occurred, is not necessarily appropriate in an education application, but actually it still might be appropriate in the context of like a history class. And so there's a lot of different dimensions that you have to look at in terms of decide when something is appropriate or not. And so actually one of the important and challenging things that we have to do is really build the technology to have the controls in place such that you can actually set them to what makes sense for that context, right? So if I'm building an AI model like Microsoft does, or in partnership with OpenAI as well, we need to make sure that all of those controls are there so that the person who's building the education application or building the medical application or building the news application can set them in a way that actually makes sense for their application, right? Rather than having this one-size-fits-all built into the technology itself.
That raises kind of an interesting question, I think, which is, there's a difference between theory, right, and philosophy and practice. So do you see kind of your role as facilitating and providing the tools, but ultimately the decisions need to be made by the teams developing the applications? How involved do you get in the practical application on a day-to-day level?
Yeah, the way that my team works is when we take a new technology, so for example, GPT-4, which is the technology powering ChatGPT, then at the beginning, we just don't even know what that technology can do, right? And so we don't know if there's changes we need to make to the core technology, and we also don't know if, how to use it responsibly. And so in the case of GPT-4, we worked with OpenAI, and we brought in experts in all different types of risk and had them red team the technology to just figure out what's possible. Like, what is it good at? What is it good at in a harmful way? Right. What do we have to watch out for? From that helped us start figuring out what's the playbook for how we're going to use this technology responsibly. But the best way to do that is not in some abstract sense, is to do it in practice in a real application. And so I led the development of responsible AI for Bing Chat, which was our first use case for GPT-4. And we brought in experts from around the company and had them embed and work full time and figure out how do we take GPT-4 and use it successfully in the search engine. And everything that we took from there, we took and built it into Azure, and now that's technology that powers all of the AI at Microsoft, but also that our customers can use to build on top of our AI systems and build their own applications. And so we see our role a lot of figuring out the pattern, figuring out the how, and then building the tools and practices and guidelines to make that easy. And then, of course, enabling that in the world. And so in some cases, if there's a behavior you just never want the system to do, then we want to fix that just in the system, in the in the platform level. But if it's something that is contextual, like we were talking about before, then my team focuses on building controls that make it easy for people to customize. Because you could just say, okay, well, it's an application level thing, you go figure it out.
Right.
But it's just way too hard. It takes a lot of expertise to do this. And so our goal is to make powerful controls that make it easy for the applications to build what they need to build.
I'm guessing that it's difficult to often decide what do you want to leave and provide controls over versus what do you want to prevent outright. Do you have kind of any examples of decisions that you had to make about things that you're not going to give developers the ability to decide to do, but that you've prevented at a system level?
Yeah, this is one of the things we think about every day and is one of the more challenging ones. So one of the things that's sort of easy to imagine you never want the system to do is produce like particularly harmful content, right? And so most people think, okay, great, we'll stop that at the platform level. And it's true for most applications, but actually one of the things my team does is use these models to generate a lot of harmful content, because that allows us to train our safety systems and ensure that they're much more effective. We also use it to adversarially test our systems. And so you have a lot of these sort of safety applications where if you're exactly building the kind of safety or responsible AI tech, you need to do the thing that you think the system should never do. And so what we end up doing is, in the case of Azure OpenAI, which is our platform offering for the OpenAI models, by default, when you show up, the safety system is built in. We have, real-time filtering of things like generation of harmful content. But we have a way for customers to apply if they have a legitimate use case that would need to generate harmful content, such as my own. And then if it's a trusted customer, we remove those controls so that they can do what they need to do. And so we found very few cases where there's things that you actually literally have 0 use cases in the world that it makes sense to do this. And so a lot of it is more the how do we prevent this, and then what are the exceptions, and how do we enable those exceptions?
Very interesting. Thinking about responsible AI, and I'm sure you get a lot of different questions and a lot of misconceptions. Can you share kind of what are some of the leading misconceptions people have about what responsible AI actually means?
Yeah, I think one of them is what we've been talking about. A lot of people think now it's like the big tech companies deciding what is the answer for the whole world, and depending on your country, your location, your culture, like the right choices, for example, if something's appropriate or not, if something's fair or not, are going to vary based on that. And so one of the misconceptions is that, we're just deciding, once and for all. As we're talking about, it's really about enabling the tools so that the application builders can get to where they need to be. I think another big one that we're really seeing right now, and this is coming up kind of in the context of regulations and things also, is that a lot of people have been really focused on the process. And so one example of this is wanting to have clean training data. So we see a lot of organizations asking us, how do you clean your training data? How do you make sure the data is not biased? Because that did make sense in the previous generation of technology, but the idea of a foundation model is that you want to put in as much data as possible so that the model understands things overall, and then you can fine-tune it to get the right behavior. So for example, if you don't put harmful content in the foundation model, if you try to fine-tune it to say, don't produce harmful content, it doesn't understand that concept, and it will actually produce more harmful content overall. And so what we really want to see in terms of things like regulations or how we think about our systems overall is you want to look at the outcome and actually focus on what are the tests or what are the outcomes that I want to achieve, and then let's innovate in how we get there, because as the technology evolves, there's different procedures that are going to result in the best outcome. Cleaning training data was maybe one before, but it's not the right way to do it now. And so I think one of the biggest things is, really making sure we're focusing on the outcome and not the process. And we see a lot of people really focus more on the process than the outcome that you want to achieve.
What are examples of outcomes? Like when you talk about outcomes for models, what does that mean for those of us which aren't as deeply in the industry?
Yeah, so, we'll stay with generative AI here. Examples I kept giving of like producing harmful content.
Right.
One outcome you would want is, in certain applications, not producing harmful content. And so how do you test that outcome? You adversarially test the system and you see its ability to produce harmful content. And you could do that through, manual expert techniques like red teaming, or you could do that through automated evaluation techniques where we actually use AI to attack the system and see. Other types of outcomes you want are potentially it not producing stereotyping content, right? Ensuring that it's representing people in a way that's fair. Another type of outcome would be that you don't want it to be vulnerable to new types of attacks. So there's new types of attacks with generative AI, like jailbreaks. These are also called prompt injection attacks. And so testing your system to ensure that you're not vulnerable to prompt injection attacks, right? And so a lot of the way we work now is saying, okay, how do we want the system to behave at the end? Now let's build tests that allow us to test how that system is supposed to behave. And then let's experiment with everything else so that we can figure out how to get to a point where we're passing those tests.
And that's different from the way that things were done previously, where there was a lot more focus on the process itself and making sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, the people were experimenting with how do we solve the problems. Then there were some best practices, and now people want the best practices from the past to be the rule, as opposed to focusing on the behavior that you want in the system.
Right. Interesting. You talked about providing controls and basically allowing people to use the platform in one way or another. Are you guys, or do you often think about making sure that people don't overuse the controls? If you think about those outcomes, is there an issue here about not only basically making sure that people are not putting their finger too much on the scale of an AI model to make sure that it's giving specific results? If that makes sense?
Yeah, one way we think about this, which is maybe a little surprising, is I think if you've used, I love GPT-4, so if you use GPT-4, but if you use ChatGPT or hopefully Microsoft Copilot, you can see that the technology in ways is magic. And when you're trying to ensure that it always behaves exactly as you expect, sometimes you can lose some of that magic. And
the serendipity of it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so we've seen this play out over and over again. When we were originally developing GitHub Copilot, which was actually one of our first generative AI applications before ChatGPT. And for those who don't know, this is an application where when you are coding, it helps auto-complete your code the same way this works with your emails today. So it's just trying to give you the next line or the next thing. And we were optimizing for the metric of acceptance, right? Okay, we gave you a good suggestion. Did you accept it? Well,
that was the outcome, right?
Yeah,
you were looking for acceptance.
Exactly. And so we were optimizing for this metric. And what we found, though, is that tends to lead to producing shorter suggestions because those are safer. Those are probably more right. But we found that actually developers love the product more when occasionally you get the long one right. Even if you get the long one wrong regularly, that serendipity of like, wow, it just knew this whole huge block of code I want was so powerful to people that it was willing to have less of it always being right, because if it was really right, then that was like very exciting. And so we saw the similar version of this playing out when we were developing Bing Chat, where there's different use cases where people want to use technology, and we're having this whole debate about ensuring that the technology responded in a way that was accurate. Now, we would say that grounded, meaning responded in a way that was true to the search results. People also call this issue hallucination, if it's just sort of making up information. And what we found is, okay, if we really train the system to focus on just responding to the search results, that was great if you were doing an informational query.
Right.
But if you wanted to use the system to write you a poem or help you brainstorm an idea, exactly, then it was much less interesting if it was only staying grounded on the search results.
Right.
And so in inspiration tests, you want a little bit of hallucination. You want it to be able to just be more free-flowing. And so the way we actually solved this problem is if you go to the Bing Copilot interface, there's actually 3 modes that a user can pick. So you can pick between creative mode and balanced mode and precise mode. And that's actually exactly tuning this scale between how grounded does it stay in the search results versus how sort of free-flowing and inspiration is that. And that was a way for us to try to keep that magic when you want the magic, but also have it be something that you can trust when you're doing a more informational type of task.
And that's being given to the end user, right? So every end user can basically decide how they want how they'd like the system to respond. That's
right, and you can change it between different queries. So if you are doing one thing one moment and the next another, you can change the setting.
Interesting. Inside Atari, we've implemented what we call a script generator, right? Where it's basically similar to GPT. You can type in free language whatever you want to achieve, clear cache, restart all the devices. I think that's an example where you're looking for accuracy, right? People are not necessarily going to be looking for inspiration there, but it's kind of one of those examples where different use cases are going to need a different kind of model to help them, or tuning the model a little bit differently.
Exactly, and I think over time, we're still just figuring out these patterns. Over time, once we kind of understand them better, then that's a place where we can build more controls into the platform level, so that if you know what type of application you're building, we make it really easy for you to do that.
So here we're seeing a trade-off between, let's call it accuracy and inspiration.
Yeah.
That'd probably be the trade-off there. Interesting. So Sarah, I know that you've also been involved in a lot of open source initiatives and community-driven initiatives. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about Onyx and Fairlearn and their impact on the AI landscape. Where do you see their place in these kind of things?
Yeah, I think open source is just incredibly important in the space of innovation in general. So I've been involved in quite a few projects over the years. Fairlearn was an example of technology that we had developed in Microsoft Research that was bringing together different algorithms to test the fairness of your system and then potentially improve the fairness of your system. And there were all these great ideas and papers, but it's really hard for someone to take a research paper and go and implement the idea.
Right.
If you build it into a tool, it's way easier for everyone to just pick it up and use it, which is the goal that I'm trying to achieve in general. Now, the other thing though is the AI space is changing really rapidly. There's just a ton of innovation, and like responsible AI is a space where we've just had a huge amount of innovation over the last couple of years. So I don't want something to just be static, right? I want the benefit of all of these different people who are out there innovating. And so putting something in the open source means all of these innovators, all these great researchers, for example, can just directly contribute and put their ideas in there and make it easier to use. And so I think open source is a great way to collaborate. It's a great way to allow people to easily use something. And so there's a lot of power in that kind of approach.
You mentioned fairness, and kind of one of the things that we've been talking about is, how do you balance personal opinions of what fairness is, but without becoming you don't want to become an adjudicator of what fairness is. Microsoft doesn't want to become an adjudicator of what fairness is. So how do you guys think about that today? How do you try and strike that balance inside the product?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to look at fairness. Now, academically, there's famously, there's a paper that I think maybe at the time was like 29 definitions of fairness, and there was 31, and I don't know how many now. It's true that theoretically there are many different definitions of fairness.
Right.
Now, in practice, in the way the system behaves, there's actually a couple sort of conceptual ones that we look at that really kind of make it easier, or at least make it easier for me to think about. So one of them is the fairness in the way the system accuracy or the system performance is. And so we call this quality of service fairness. But this is saying that the system is equally accurate for all groups of people. So if we take our speech-to-text system, which is taking speech in and transcribing it into text, this is something that's built into Microsoft Teams and used by many people around the world. We want that to work for all types of voices, all types of accents, different languages, different dialects, and so there's not a lot of question about what the fairness is supposed to look like. If it's not working well for a group of people, then that's a problem, and we should go fix that, right?
Not very controversial.
Yes, exactly. Now, a type of fairness that's a lot more controversial, but is like conceptually almost the same thing, is the fairness of the allocation from the system. So if you have a model that is, for example, deciding who should get credit, who should get a loan, now the model could be very accurate, but it could still be distributing resources in a way that the allocation seems unfair, depending on what metric you look at.
Right.
And so that's one where it's a lot more challenging to say sort of what should that allocation distribution look like? Should it be based on historical information? Should this be based on what we aspire for the allocation to look like in the world, somewhere in between? And this is something that obviously the finance industry has to deal with all of the time. And so that's one where very much more we want to give the tools. If it's a Microsoft system that's making these decisions, then we have to decide how we're doing it. But for people building on top of our AI systems, we want to give the tools for them to test that and adjust that. But it wouldn't be appropriate for us to decide in all different applications how that should be figured out. Now, the last one, which I think is where you're seeing a lot of attention right now, is what we call representational fairness, which is how the AI system represents people. And in that case, it's actually is the system producing stereotyping or demeaning content? Is it overrepresenting one group? Is it underrepresenting a group? Is it erasing a group? And that one, it can be a lot more challenging because depending on the context, it may make sense to be overrepresenting a group or not. And so that's one where I think we're still really experimenting with what the right thing to do is there. And I think the way we kind of lean now is you want the system to do what's in line with the user intent. And so if the user is just asking something generic, for example, I want a picture of a woman,
group of people,
you want the system to produce diversity, give the user options. If the user specifies very specifically what they're looking for, like I want a person that looks this way, the system should produce that. It shouldn't be trying to do something different. But this is a place where it's just so net new.
Right.
And I frankly feel that we don't have the interfaces quite right. We don't have these interfaces that allow people to really specify what they want, how they want it. And so I hope that we're going to see more innovation in kind of that user interface that allows people to get the outcome they want from the AI system, rather than the AI system deciding what they want.
So you think that there's going to be a lot of perhaps focus on how the input is provided, or making sure that we're understanding what is the intent of the users? Meaning that that's kind of an area which may help deal with that representation issue on the other end of it.
Exactly. And what you don't want is the system by default leaning one direction or another, or only being able to produce one thing. But then, yes, absolutely, I think it's about giving the users control. And one of the things that's great about the technology today is that you can iterate with it. You can say, oh, I don't want that, maybe something more like this. And so it's not just, oh, the user has to specify everything they want up front. It's creating that experience that allows the user to get to an outcome that they want.
Yeah, the speed of iteration, right? In the past, you may have been working with a creative director, got a picture ready, and then, no, that's not what I meant, and you have to wait now another 2-3 weeks, and now, this is a case of 10 seconds later, you can see something completely different.
Yeah, and you can also, one of the things that's great with the technology is a lot of people use it more at the beginning of the process. Oh, you can iterate, kind of visualize what you want, and then send that over to a creative director who can actually make it wonderful, but it allowed you to more clearly specify what you want, right? I am a person who maybe doesn't come from a creative background, and maybe I have something in mind, but I don't actually know how to describe it, and so having a tool that lets me experiment so that I'm like, that's what I want, then it can help me better communicate with my creative director, for example.
And maybe that's a good example of where you would pick the setting, which is more inspiration and less accuracy, right? Maybe if you're in the process of that, brainstorming and learning about new ideas and really broadening your horizons. Fascinating stuff. So as you think about responsible AI, what are the emerging trends that you're seeing or technologies related that you're excited about for the future?
Yeah, so one of the things that most people don't realize is that this most recent generation of technology has actually been a huge breakthrough for responsible AI. So for example, the foundation models are multimodal, for example, the foundation models are multilingual. And so a lot of places where we see mistakes that a language model was making in the past was because it didn't understand the language, or people were potentially code switching, meaning switching between languages or mixing languages. And so now that the models inherently understand a much larger set of languages all at once, you don't see those places where it's making a mistake. But one of the much more interesting things that we discovered developing Bing Chat originally was actually the ability to use this technology as a tool for testing. So one of the challenges of responsible AI is that if you take, for example, trying to decide if a conversation is hateful, that's a pretty difficult thing to do. Our guidelines for that are about 20 pages long and are designed to be used by an expert linguist to go and say, is this particular conversation, problematic? And that's not something that historically we've been able to automate, which meant we could only check for responsible AI really in the outer loop. You built the whole system, kind of ready to go. Now you run this human test, you have human labelers go look at the result, and hopefully it looks good enough. And that's okay, but that doesn't allow us to innovate every day and see if we can make it even better from a responsible AI point of view. And what we found when developing Bing Chat is actually this technology, we can train it to score almost as well as those expert human labelers, which meant now we can test every time we make a small change to the system, we update the meta prompt or something, we can actually test it overnight, see if we're doing a little better. And that meant we could tweak so many things and experiment with new techniques. And so we had so much more innovation in our responsible AI, mitigations because of the testing, actually. And so that was a huge breakthrough that we just did not expect to happen. And so in general, the fact that the technology is about understanding the world, understanding human language, human information better, is a huge thing for responsible AI because it in fact is a very human-driven field. It is about making technology work for humans. So going forward, I'm excited for kind of more of the same, but I think it's just going to be more powerful. And of course, we'll see like multimodal coming. Right now, it can understand text and images and kind of the combinations. But when you truly understand the intersection of audio and video and text and images, I think that's going to be a whole other level of breakthrough.
Very exciting. You mentioned making the technology work for humans. And I think, one of the things that we hear and one of the things that you hear kind of in the world is how is this actually going to impact the job market? How is this going to impact people's livelihoods? How is this going to impact kind of the training that people need to get? So one, would love to hear how you think about that. And also, as more and more people get trained in using AI and how AI can help them do their jobs, what's the role of teaching them about responsible AI and how to incorporate that into their decision making?
Yeah, this is top of mind for so many people today, right? You see this powerful technology. It seems very human-like.
Right.
You know, what does it mean for me? What does it mean for my job going forward? And I think that, you know, at Microsoft, we named our technology very intentionally. You know, most of our products are called Copilot for a reason. We think that the technology is really about augmenting human ability,
right.
about being able to reduce the drudgery of your everyday job. And so if we go back to that example of GitHub Copilot, which was one of the first applications we developed, there was questions of like, are developers going to like this? Are they worried it's replacing them?
Right.
And you know what we found is, first of all, developers love it. And then, you know, some of our early numbers were showing that about 40% of the code was written from GitHub Copilot. And what's more important to me is that 75% of developers said their work was more satisfying. Because now the stuff that was kind of just wrote and it's just a standard function
right.
you're writing out, they don't need to think about it. Instead, they get to think about what's differentiating in their code and what's really important. And so we've kind of seen that pattern play out over and over again. And so I think there's just kind of huge potential in terms of this technology making people's work better and allowing them to have the headspace to do the part of their work that is interesting. Now, that said, of course, it's going to change how people work, right? In education, we need to think about how do you do a job now that you have these tools available. The skills are going to be different, the job is going to be different. And so certainly there's going to be impact as roles evolve, and we've always seen that with technology. But we've always seen actually that technology overall ends up being a net creator of jobs. And so I think we're really excited about the future of the technology, but there's certainly going to be, you know, different fields and things that are going to go through some interesting transition periods as they figure out what does it mean to do work in that field now that this technology is available.
A bumpy road, but one which will lead to a good place, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we have control over this, right? Actually, I think education has been a great space where, you know, we're here in New York City, and actually we work with the Department of Education here, and the first thing that they did was ban ChatGPT, right? And they're like, this is going to be a disaster, and they banned it. And then they really rapidly pivoted and said, wow, this is a technology of the future. We need to figure out how to ensure that kids can use it safely and responsibly, and that they're able to build the skills that they need in the future so that they're actually able to go out in the workforce that has a technology like this. And so they actually started this really innovative project to build a ChatGPT for education for New York schools, and that's been piloted in schools now. And so they were really quick to embrace it and say, oh, we need to actually figure out how to bring this technology in and do the right thing rather than trying to ignore it. And so I think, you know, each field kind of needs to look, and each organization, and do the same thing and figure out what does it mean for me and how should we use it and how shouldn't we use it, right? It's not just a free-for-all of it makes sense to use it exactly in this way. And so there's, you know, a lot of control we have over this if we actually go in eyes open and figure out, you know, what are the important problems that need solving.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, kids today are growing up with this. I see it with my children, you know, 8 and 5, they're already playing with this, asking questions, getting responses, you know, both on the generating text, generating images, and they're growing up with this in the same way that maybe I grew up with a landline, right, a telephone, and it was very easy for me to imagine that I can pick up the phone and call anyone anywhere. They're growing up with, you know, with these incredible technologies, and we're only seeing the beginning of it. So
yeah, and I think that's actually one of the things I love about working in this space so much, is really empowering others to use the technology, because they're, you know, infinitely more creative than I am, or we could be entirely at Microsoft. And so seeing what the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs go and do with this technology is just so important. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be so exciting, because I think we're just at the beginning of what the tech can do, but also we're just at the beginning of people figuring out what they want to do with the technology. So I think it's just going to be a really exciting future.
I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, what we've seen with our customers at Atera is that, you know, in the beginning they hear AI and they're a little bit worried about it, but when they see the kind of task that it can, you know, it can replace, right? The restarting a router for the 100th time, or setting up an out of office for somebody, or checking, you know, why their printer isn't connecting. When they realize that they no longer have to do that and they're going to be able to focus on more high value things, it really stands to reason that they get more satisfaction from their jobs and they're enjoying it more. So augmenting human ability, I think, is definitely a very exciting idea.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of removing the drudgery. Like, I don't think anyone's that excited about doing those specific tasks. They might love their job, but
Right.
those specific tasks, if they're just handled, then I think that it's great. And so, I think that that's what's really exciting. The other thing that I think is really exciting about the technology is, the power of it is that it speaks human language, that it understands humans, that it can meet us where we're at. And so this actually means that it can be a bridge to basically all other technologies or many other complex systems. And so, for example, we worked with H&R Block, and they have released an AI tax assist that is for helping people do their taxes. And whenever I'm doing my taxes, there's all of this jargon, and I'm like, what does this mean for me? And then I click the little help box, and then it's more jargon that I
Right.
don't understand. It's not in the language
I'm even
I'm
more
doing.
confused
Yeah,
afterwards,
exactly.
right?
It's like, I don't know how this fits in my life, but if I can actually just go ask in my language and it can explain how this applies to my life in the words I understand, then wow, I can suddenly do my taxes, which is a very powerful thing, because I had this technology that was helping be a bridge. And we're seeing this pattern play out over and over again. And so that's, for me, one of the things that I think is so exciting about the future potential of this is really empowering so many more people to be able to have agency and control in their world, navigate complex systems, whether that's technology, whether that's government. And so we really see this, I think, as a great enabler for people.
Making taxes less painful is definitely something I think everybody can get behind.
Yeah, exactly.
Taking a kind of a half step back, you've given us a lot of really, really great examples, but where are people succeeding with AI today, and where are the areas where you still think that there's a way to go?
Yeah, I think that the technology, right, is great with language. It's not so good with math. And so these tasks that were very human language driven before, customer service is a great example of this one. We find people are doing really, really well with. If you're trying to have it do much more complex analysis of something, maybe not. If what it's doing is summarizing a lot of internal documents, that tends to work great. Lots of organizations have all of their data in documents and in human language, and so it's great at finding and summarizing and all of that. The other thing that we sort of tell organizations, certainly from a responsible AI point of view, is you want to start with a use case that is high value. So you're going to actually, be willing to take the time, invest, properly test it. But you also want to start with a use case that hopefully is more narrow. If you want to produce actually something more like Bing Chat that can answer kind of any question in the world, and it generates poems and it answers from the internet, that's a huge surface area. That is a lot that you have to go figure out on how to make it safe, how to make it work well in every use case. And so starting with something narrow but high value.
GitHub Copilot as an example.
Yeah, where you can really get your feet wet and get a feel for it. I think it's kind of a great way to get going. And so those narrower use cases, I think, is where we see people having a lot of success, particularly in sort of human interaction. But I think going forward, ChatGPT captured so many people's imagination. So almost everyone comes and they're like, I want to make a chatbot. I don't know if we want the whole world to be chatbots, or every way that I work with everything is a chatbot. And so the other thing is some of the most powerful use cases actually are more like that GitHub Copilot, where you're thoughtful about how you integrate the technology in a workflow, and the technology is helping people get a task done that they were already getting done, rather than just chatting with this thing on the side that's outside of my workflow. And so really encouraging people to look more at how do you bring this into workflows where you just get that magic, rather than everyone just has 50 chatbots in their life now.
I definitely agree with that. So as you look ahead, as you think about kind of the next 5 years, and things are changing so rapidly, it might not be a fair question, but what are your aspirations for the field of responsible AI? What is the impact that you hope to make, both yourself, Microsoft, to this field of responsible AI?
Yeah, I think that this is a hard question, and it's actually something I ask myself all the time, right? We're moving very quickly, but there is this feeling of sort of the weight of history. And so, it's going to be hard to know, looking back, in 10 years, let's say, what it actually looks like, how this is perceived. But the thing I'm trying to do right now is make the best decisions I can with the information I have. And as we talked about earlier, my goal is to really show the way. Like, we kind of have ideas on what we want to achieve, but it's really hard to figure out how. A lot of this is new technology. It takes a lot of innovation to figure out how to solve these responsible AI problems. And so, the goal that I have with the work now is showing one way that this can be done, and actually being, open and transparent about that, sharing that with the whole ecosystem as an example of how we might solve these problems. And that can help influence other innovation, so we can even figure out better solutions to how to solve the problem, so people can build on top of us. And then also helping people like regulators and things understand, here's a way that works, right? And so that they can actually start from something practical. So I think the showing how is one goal of mine and what we're trying to achieve. The other is
teaching people how to fish.
Yeah, exactly. And it turns out that if you have something so new, fishing happens to be old, we have some techniques on how to do that. But if you're starting with, okay, we have fish and we have no tools, what do we do? Like, you have to go and figure out how to actually go solve this problem. And so you have to show people that, oh, you can make a fishing rod this way, or you can make a spear that way, right? And so that's certainly part of it. And then I think the second one is making it easy. I like to use the expression safe by default for how we're trying to build our platforms right now. If you show up and you build an AI system, you certainly can't ignore responsible AI, right? You need to understand how to apply it in your context, all of the things we talked about earlier. But we want to make it easy to do that. It shouldn't be a significant investment that requires deep expertise that you probably can't find and can't afford. Instead, we want to go solve those hard problems and then make it easy for everyone to just build on top of where we started. And so that's the other goal that we're driving for every day. Figure out how to do this and then figure out how to make it easy for everyone else to do the same.
So Dr. Sarah Bard, thank you so much for joining us. This has been fascinating and enlightening, and I think very exciting for the future.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.